Sizikodwa, ANC national spokesperson, joins us as Sizwe Pamla Kwesatu spokesperson, Dr. Danisa Baloyi, the Black Business Council CEO, and Mzwanele Manyi, the convener of the Decolonization Foundation and the Professionals Progressive Forum. Thanks so much for joining us. The lines are open as always, folks. You're welcome to join in. Very quiet, of course, on the regulator side, just issuing statements to say they acknowledge the process of the Competition Commission, but very little else in terms of the interest or accountability that they're taking. No surprises there. We'll start with you, Mzwanele.
Yeah, look, I think a slight disappointment there, because I think it's important for South Africa to understand that the role of the Reserve Bank is to protect the currency. Now, if we've got these currency shenanigans happening under the nose of the Reserve Bank, and the Reserve Bank seems sort of at ease with what is happening, that is very concerning for us. That's the first thing. Secondly, we've been told that we've got a FIC here, which is supposed to be very efficient in monitoring suspicious transactions. Now, we're surprised that these big moves, these big movements of monies, why is it that FIC has not been able to spot this and take this?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Mzwanele. I believe your mic is a bit scratchy, so we'll get our sound engineer to come and fix that. Dr. Baloyi, maybe you can take that as well. I mean, if this is something that has been happening in perpetuity, we've seen it in the construction, the milk, bread, yes, and all other cartels, and now the financial sector. You know, we seem to have learned to live with this kind of corruption.
All day long I've been saying that the problem that we have in South Africa is that if you're big, you are welcome to be criminal. And if you're small, you get slayed. So the sardines are killed all the time and the big fish swim away. I think we need to be quite honest with the people of South Africa that the silence to me is deafening. And if you look at the headlines saying the timing of the bank probe, we shouldn't care about when. It should be about the fact that they found criminality and reported it. So your question to me begs the answer. Why is it that we are selective in being outraged about criminality? Why is it that the people who are responsible for the banks, because they report to someone, we know that they are trying to report to themselves, but at the moment they report to someone, the oversight is lacking, and that's worrying.
So sorry, just to pick up on your thought.
Yes, no, I was saying, for us as Progressive Professionals Forum, we're actually very concerned and worried that the Reserve Bank does not seem to be very nervous about this. They've issued a very lukewarm statement, and we're worried because this is actually marking their homework. This is talking to the kind of oversight role the Reserve Bank should have been doing in protecting the rand. If we've got these banks that are playing shenanigans with the currency, which is the primary objective in terms of Section 225 of the Constitution that the Reserve Bank should be looking after, and yet all of this has happened, and the Reserve Bank seems to be quite easy with this. And said, secondly, we're also worried because we've been told that we've got this FIC, Financial Intelligence Center, which is meant to be monitoring all kinds of suspicious transactions. How did these transactions get missed that are so big? This is why, for us as Progressive Professionals Forum, we are very worried about this FIC bill, because if we are going to have banks that have got outsourced law into them and they're behaving in this rogue and corrupt manner, and you've got FIC that is supposed to supply them information, you've got FIC itself that misses such big fishes but is busy catching individuals. So the whole system requires a serious overhaul. So we think that this is an opportunity we should not miss. That FIC bill must be thrown back so that everything must be done from scratch, so that everything is done properly.
Yeah, but I mean, we've talked about the decolonization of our systems and the structures, that if that is not done, uprooted, we essentially just tinkering around the same issue. If you're saying that the Reserve Bank is a co-accomplice when it comes to issues of rand fixing or rand manipulation, devaluating it and impacting on the economy, etc., and nothing has been done, Zizi, what are the realistically speaking, what are the probabilities of being able to shift this kind of system?
I think the expose has got serious political implications. Firstly, is that you must remember that the banking sector, particularly the banks, are an important instrument in terms of our quest for economic growth and development. For them to be found in a manner that seeks to undermine even the constitutional mandate of the Reserve Bank to protect the currency, the value of the currency, that is one political implication. The second is that you are dealing with a sector that I think one guest talked about the credibility, the trust, the independency, which is throughout globally is respected, that our banking system is one of the best in the world. And yet we've just discovered, like an arms cache, we've discovered some underworld, we've discovered crime, which was well organized. And I think it's something that we must deal with without painting everybody with the same brush. But it's important that we must hit one to teach others. We've in the past discovered in the exposés of cartels in the construction sector. All what to do is a fine of 10 million. They can easily pay that 10 million. That's why we say to manipulate a currency is a serious offense. Yes. And there must be criminal charge for sabotage. Because we have been struggling to grow our economy above 1%. The question we must ask, what role have they played to make sure that we don't grow above 1%? And we've been struggling to grow our economy. We've been trying to make calls to extend hand to social partners to agree on a social contract that come and play with us so that we can make sure that we participate in growing the economy. The banks have not been coming, including the private sector, and yet they've been involved in some activities.
Yeah.
In fact, the manipulation can also be banks must answer in terms of the 9/12 saga. To what extent has that 9/12 saga been helped and abated by these banks? We had a big chunk of the JSE wiped off because of these shenanigans of the currency flows up and down, and yet now we know that there was nothing natural about this. This is all induced. This is all staged. This is all masterminded. So banks must answer to this. Indeed, this is very criminal. And for us as Progressive Professionals Forum, in fact, we are calling for jail sentences. That these CEOs, this is crime. We cannot have a situation where government is very collaborating with this. We can't have government collaborating with corruption and 10% because these companies, they simply budget for this 10%. So we can't have 10% of turnover being the showstopper because these are huge institutions, they budget for this. So we're calling for jail sentences so that there must be a deterrent for corruption.
Yeah, but Sizwe, what is fact and fiction? Because for so long we've been told that market sentiment needs to be protected. There's global conditions, external inflation that we cannot control. How do we even know the extent of this kind of collusion and the impact it's had on the economic growth?
Well, because we're not in charge, we're not going to know anything. Look, as COSATU, we are happy to see this outrage. We are happy that people are actually angry. But some of it is phony because it comes from people who actually are supposed to bring about solutions to this issue. It's not for the first time we've been raising this issue. This issue has been on the table for quite some time. Workers have been paying the price. In fact, the 10% that we are talking about, the penalty, these banks will transfer to workers who are consumers through bank charges and interest rate. So they are not going to pay this penalty, by the way. We have made this call before to say you cannot operate an economy like ours with a reserve bank that seems to not to be interested in defending the interest, at least of the country and the majority, in how it handles its macroeconomic policy, but broadly in how it manages its affairs. The point that we want to emphasize as the Federation is that we do need to talk about the role of the Reserve Bank. Either that Reserve Bank, we nationalize it, or we give that Reserve Bank a new mandate. Because, by the way, most of the people who sit in that monetary committee, but also in that Reserve Bank, are appointed by the president, including the governor himself. So the question that has to be asked is to say, why is it that the Reserve Bank, every time you have these instances, they are found sleeping on the wheel?
Okay, and that's the call that the ANC Youth League has made. Are we likely to see this manifest, at least within this financial year, where there's a shift, top down, and not only in the Reserve Bank and National Treasury alike?
The question in the context of radical economic transformation, what role should the Treasury play, for example? What role should the Reserve Bank play? And I don't think we must already preempt. There are a number of investigations, of course, in the context of this expose that must take place. But we've got to ask these difficult questions, as raised by Kosato. What role must the Reserve Bank play in advancing radical economic transformation, as well as Treasury?
And Mzwanele, sorry, you were saying that there are policies in place at the moment that won't even enable the biki that is there in terms of set-asides because of the compliance that is required, you know, the 80-20, 90-10 split when it comes to opportunities within government.
Yeah, no, definitely. We are very worried as Progressive Professions Forum that National Treasury is actually undermining the announcement made by President Zuma. President Zuma announced in the dinner of the Black Business Council that the PPFA is going to be repealed. This is now almost going for half a year towards 3/4 of the year that nothing in the sort is happening. Instead, National Treasury has been fiddling with regulations. We know that regulations cannot be more progressive than the law. If the law is defective, you can't have regulations that can be more progressive than the law. Can't have that. So the regulations are there to implement the law. The law is defective. You can't therefore spend time on how to implement a defective law. The call has been made even by the NGC of the ANC to say this thing must be reviewed. President came and said this thing must be repealed. Now you've got an implementing department that is doing everything to stall and delay and postpone this indefinitely. And we're saying we can see this trick and all of this whole notion that there's 30% to black is not true. There's no such a thing. That 30% of subcontracting is not to black. Is to exempted micro enterprises, which could be anybody, could be even be white people, who could be 100% white. As long as you meet the threshold, you are an exempted micro enterprise. So this whole notion that you've now done something for black people is simply not true. Even the 51% of the QSEs, the qualifying small enterprises, that still means 45%, 49% white people. So we can't have a situation where we are being told that now all of a sudden there's going to be this 30% dispensation for black people. It's simply not true. And we're saying as PPF that we're tired of these monkey tricks that Treasury keeps playing. We want real radical transformation. We are rejecting these regulations. We want to see a repeal of this law. We also want a review of CIDB, that these are all the policies that continue to strangle the development of black business, the development of black people, and at the same time entrench the strength of white monopoly capital, entrench the inequality. So if you don't deal with those laws, we're playing games.
But I mean, to send a strong message, as you were saying that we've heard this before, and very little has changed in the economic inclusion of majority black, that if number one, we need a license for a state-owned bank. Is it something that can happen almost in the immediate? And also for government to pull its monies out, as the call was made by the Youth League, and invest in the development.
But who must do it? It's the Reserve Bank again. But I want to go back to what Zizi said, that the financial institutions are important to this country, but they are not holy cows. They can't do as they please. They cannot make the poor poorer, because when you manipulate the rand, the cost of living goes up for the poor. It affects the gogo who has to buy meal and bread. Is that real? And when they did it at the end of last year, under the pretext that heaven will fall over if there's a new Minister of Finance. Who got affected? Because it was Christmas. Those prices haven't gone down until now. Ordinary people suffer. But even if you are a small business person and the rand does what it does and you go borrow money, you struggle because the shift might mean when you have to pay back, you pay back more. So it affects growth. It affects development, and these people just get a slap on the wrist, and they never go to jail, they never get prosecuted, and that's what should worry South Africans. Yeah. Why is justice selective when it comes to the financial institutions even when they do wrong.
It's even more astonishing that these monopoly capital will factor this as a line item in their financials to say, you know, instead of transformation, we'd rather sacrifice 10% or collude even for that matter. Zizi, that needs to change almost immediately. So I don't know. You know, it sounds like we're going to have to go back and have another white paper consultative process as to the changing the legislation or policies with the majority in the cabinet being the ANC. Are you going to take on that armor to say, you know, enough is enough? We're going to start behaving like a ruling party.
In order to realize a radical economic transformation, we said we'll use strategic levers of power. We'll use legislation, we'll use budget. That's why budget can be something different from what the president said. The budget has got to match the strategic objectives of what the president has announced and delivered a plan. The treasury can't introduce something else, something new. It has got to respond and make money available in what the president has delivered. And it's important to do so because we can't be talking about, in the next 10 years, talking about four major banks. We can't be talking about 4 major construction companies. We can't be talking about 4 major mining companies. In almost every sector, there's a monopoly that is not more than 4. We've got to diversify the financial sector, including the bank, and introduce new players. And those new players can't come overnight. It has got to be the government deliberate intervention, including licensing of the post bank, including creation. I heard Zoa sometime was talking about a black bank.
Yeah.
And these are the initiatives we must say objectively, what do they mean in the context of diversifying financial sector? Because we cannot live with 4, because this 4 has proven that they have no interest of the poor, the unbankable. The unbankable in terms of the commercial banks, obviously, they will never be successful and deliver in this country.
Yeah, we concede that it is daylight robbery, that the banks
It is a heist.
have become a law unto themselves and with impunity and it just a reflection of the economy. Sizwe, from a worker's point of view, especially when there are sticky issues around inflation-based increases, even that speaks of the crumbs off the dinner table.
Yeah.
There's issues of minimum wage, which business will contest and say it's going to result in hemorrhaging of jobs. And we see clear indications that there is money that could be reinvested elsewhere, except the banks are not interested. It's just global greed that is perpetuated.
Well, to be honest, as workers, we like what we are hearing from the ANC. We liked what we heard from the president. We get a sense that our government is starting to recover its lost fortitude. But unfortunately, it's still a triumph of experience over optimism and sentiment as far as we are concerned. We've been here before. We have raised these issues. So this budget should prove us wrong, that our cynicism was misplaced. It should prove us wrong because if you look at the ANC in terms of the January 8 statement, it is very clear. It has put clear directives as to what it expects its government to do. And the State of the Nation address was actually linked to exactly what the NEC statement said on the January 8th. Now, we have to look at this budget because the problem with Treasury is institutional. You can remove faces there. That institution needs to be transformed. There are people there, those neoliberal hardliners who have overplayed the neoliberal policies for the last 23 years. We have to be bold and make it clear to them to say, this ANC has a mandate from the electorate. Because the ANC cannot be impeached in power by an economy when it has been given a mandate by the people. So we like what we are hearing. We are looking forward to the budget. But like we have said before, if we continue to allow the Reserve Bank and Treasury to operate the way they've been operating before, we will be here this time next year and we'll be talking about these very same issues.
But the ramifications of overhauling the system, as you were considering that we've become so accustomed to where things are, the dependence we have on international monetary funds and various agencies, will impact in the way South Africa is perceived around the world and how the economy is going to recover going forward.
Let's not forget that they also found banks guilty in Europe. They also found them guilty in the US. So it's not just South Africa. These people, and Barclays, by the way, has been found twice, and most of the 17 have also been found wanting And so this is something they do all the time. They need to be stopped because we are a small economy. We are not the United States. We're not the amalgamated Europe. We're just South Africa. And it impacts so heavily on our population, on the poor, because of the triple challenges that we face in this country. They are real. And when the economy is affected, ordinary people suffer. We've seen it. And we can't grow.
Yeah, just very quickly in closing, we still have that 800 billion or so that monopoly capital is sitting on, watching how things turn out in terms of political stability or who's the next president, you know, and how they're going to move their next pawn in terms of the game of chess. So if we're still dealing with deregulating certain systems, while currently there is opportunities to inject funds or investment in the country or in the economy, Mzwanele, what are some of the dynamics that we're still dealing with?
I think it just shows how insincere business is. There's a CEO initiative here that the president has embraced wholeheartedly. That CEO initiative has only produced only 1 billion to say they're going to fund. What an insult. That is going to be a fund to fund SMEs. With all the 800 billion that are sitting in the reserves, that is waiting for their puppet, so to speak. And if it's not their puppet, then they keep the money back. It's a problem. And I think also it's important for us not to be scared by international investors. International investors are the most understanding people. All they want is certainty. As long as they are clear what are the rules of engagement, they always fit in. So this whole notion of being scared by international investors is actually misplaced, and it must not be used to scare us, because we know that they are the most, in fact, the international investors are more understanding than the local ones. The local ones who know our situation, they sit with the billions in their reserves, and they don't want to do development.
Just in closing, Zizi, how the banks should be dealt with going forward?
Well, the private sector has been on strike in terms of investment strike. And I think it's important that the listed expose, we invite them, that they must be part of South Africa going forward, that they must come and invest. This is their own South Africa. It is in their interest that they might invest to deal with issues of inequality, unemployment in our country. Because if they do so, we cannot allow markets to influence the direction politically of this country. We have taken that view. That neoliberal view, it will not succeed in South Africa. Therefore, it's only helpful that the banks and the private sector must join the African National Congress and join the government to make sure that we build and participate in the construction of a better South Africa.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks indeed to our esteemed panelists talking about the bank expose of collusion and manipulating the rand, affecting the rand-dollar exchange rate, imports, exports, job creation, and generally the quality of life. Much appreciated. Zizi Kodwa as the ANC National Spokesperson, Sizwe Pamla Kosatu Spokesperson, Dr. Dani Sabaloi, BBC CEO, Mzwanele Manyi is the Progressive Professionals Forum convener. We take a quick ad break. We'll be back just after this with Clive Ramatibela Smith and Biz Pulse.